So there's a misconception that if you're single, you are incomplete, perhaps damaged, salvaged, and you won't be happy until you find your one. And that is not true. That is bullshit. It is a message that has been fed to us by media and advertising. The truth is, when you're single, you have the richest soil for growth. That's why I created this podcast. And unlike other podcasts, this one is host-driven, not guest-driven. That means I will be rotating health and wellness experts 3 times a week to give you the giant box of wellness crayons, not just the primary colors, so you can start building a meaningful life. It's time to give singlehood a cape. Today's host is Rena Martine. She was a Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney for 14 years, where she specialized in sex crimes, child abuse, and domestic violence cases. Today, she continues to serve women as an intimacy coach, educator, TEDx speaker, and author, with a mission and a fire in her belly to help women love their bodies, experience deep intimacy, and of course, have great sex, all shame-free. Enjoy, Rena Martine.
I am Rena Martine, and I am your host today, Women's Intimacy Coach. I am joined by Dan Crowdus. Dan is an ADHD coach with a background in engineering and producing music. After his own ADHD diagnosis at the age of 7, Dan has spent years building a system from some of the best minds in the field that has allowed him to embrace his neurodiversity as a superpower. He now helps ambitious adults with ADHD do the same and transform their big goals into big results. Something that is not in Dan's bio is that he's also my partner in love and in life. We have been together a little over 4 years now. I do not have ADHD. This is my first experience being in a relationship with somebody who has ADHD. So today we're going to talk all about how to live and love if you are somebody who has ADHD or are in a relationship with someone who has it and you're coming into this a little bit blind. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Hello. You didn't say partner in crime. I thought that's what people say in these situations.
Partner in crime, partner in all the good, the bad, and the ugly, but mostly good, So, is it just me, or does it seem like a lot of people, a lot of adults are being newly diagnosed as having ADHD?
Yeah, there's so many. It's like an avalanche. And the current estimates I've heard is somewhere around 5% that like the National Medical Societies are starting to come around with. And then you think, okay, that's 1 in 20 people. Were that many people really diagnosed as children? And maybe that number is going to go up. But instead of thinking of it as a disorder, I like to think of it as a brain type. There's a lot of disadvantages, but there's a lot of advantages too. So yeah, it's crazy just how many people are recently getting diagnosed as adults.
I mean, I'm seeing this within my own practice too. I'm seeing more and more clients who I'm working with who are saying to me, oh my gosh, and I just found out I have ADHD. And so I do want to talk about what ADHD is in just a moment. But what I'm seeing is that people are getting this diagnosis and perhaps being prescribed some medication. But after that, they're not really given a lot of tools to start changing their life to accommodate the fact that their brain works a little bit differently than a neurotypical brain. What are you seeing in the space as people are getting newly diagnosed?
Well, if you think about it, this brain type has been around forever. And I read a book once that compared that, saying this is the hunter brain as opposed to the farmer brain. So if you're newly diagnosed and you're wondering do I have to do everything differently? Not really, because you've lived with this your entire life and you've already created some kind of coping mechanisms. So, you're different, not necessarily that it's going to hold you back in all these different ways. However, in the modern world, especially being a knowledge worker, office worker, whatever, that doesn't really fit in naturally with the ADHD brain, where you always want to be pursuing new things. You want to kind of go with the moment. And yeah, it's hard to live in modern society like that. So yeah, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You can either be the inattentive type, where it's just hard to pay attention, combined type, where you have hyperactivity and inattentivity, or the more rare pure hyperactivity type. So yeah, like how exactly do you live your new life if you're recently diagnosed is figure out what you've been doing that has been working, and then try to identify some things that have been challenges for you and think like, oh, okay, what can I use by researching ADHD that's going to help me figure out these things in my life that haven't been going as well? Like, and also if you have some story that you've already been telling yourself or other people, like, I'm just always late to things. And that can be pervasive, but keep you from improving that. So maybe re-examine some of those things that you kind of took for granted that, oh, I just always do this. And then you're like, okay, if this is ADHD, maybe there is some system, some solution out there that I can start doing differently and actually change that.
I'm glad that you brought up the example of being late, because I think this is a nice entryway into, okay, what does this look like in real life? I know you've said that I'm the most punctual person you've ever known in your entire life.
It's true.
True story. And you have had to create systems to become more punctual, not because of me, but in order to be in relationships. You've created systems that predate me, on how to accommodate the fact that naturally speaking, time works a little bit differently in your ADHD brain. So what does that look like? How do you show up as a partner with ADHD if you are in a relationship with somebody who, like me, is kind of a stickler for time?
Right. So I'll start with a much lower level answer because I find this really fascinating. If you think about how does the brain perceive time, it's a very kind of abstract thing. And with the ADHD brain, it literally will perceive time differently. And the perception of time is closely linked to memory and working memory. And of the parts of memory with ADHD, it's really the working memory, that short term, what you're kind of holding in your temporary store before it goes to long term, that's affected. Long term memory isn't really affected much at all. So yeah, that's why you have like the idea that half an hour from now and 5 hours from now kind of feel the same, because the circuitry that measures that is a little bit faulty. So, okay, you accept that I have faulty circuitry when it comes to measuring time. So you use external systems for that. So I have a digital timer I use quite frequently. It's funny, I don't use it quite as much anymore as when I got it a few years ago, because some of it's becoming a little bit more natural, which is kind of funny how that happens. But all right, so let's get to the practical. Yeah, I used to be way more late than I am. I was never like as bad as, maybe some quote unquote ADHD people like to, feel. But over the years, it's finding little things like the timer, using calendars, using reminders. It's a bit cliche, and a lot of people newly diagnosed with ADHD get frustrated because they just say, everyone just says, use lists, use apps, use timers. Like, well, yeah, you build up to that. Like, what's one small thing you can start doing that'll make some small change? And then once you've mastered that, then maybe, doing a more complex system, having your calendar a little bit more involved in your life. But yeah, like the more things that you do, they kind of add up, and then you'll gradually be a more and more punctual person.
So, okay, let's break this down then. You're saying use timers. So when you and I are going to hang out, say we have plans in the evening, because, and I'll let our listeners know that you and I do not live together. We live around the corner from one another. So I'm not going to be the one who's knocking on the door in the other room saying, come on, Dan, it's time to go, because we live apart.
Yes. So also don't do that.
So, yeah, also don't be that person. But so what does that look like for you? Are you literally setting a timer that's like, I must meet Rena in 15 minutes kind of thing?
So I have a digital timer that doesn't have any functionality that says this happens then. But if I'm about to go, like through a work block, and what I need to do when I do a deep work block is block out all distractions, sign off all email, put the phone on do not disturb, or better yet, the phone in another room. Or one thing I love to do is just yeet it, throw it across the room so it hits my couch. But if you...
And yeet, that's spelled Y-E-E-T.
Y-E-E-T for you non-Gen Y or non-millennials out there.
That's me.
Yes. Yeah, so it's just counting down. So say like my next appointment meeting is in 2 hours. That's going to count down from 2 hours. And that's the one thing in front of me that's keeping track of that, so I can stay absorbed in my work. If I'm on the couch reading a book, then I'm just going to make sure that I like track that ahead of time and I'm able to keep an eye on a clock. And that's something that I was able to gradually develop after doing this for a while. So if you're starting off, you might want to be more explicit with it, and maybe you do set a timer or alarm on your phone, just make sure it's out of reach. So there's lots of tools available. I would say just pick one at a time, figure out something that works for you. But yeah, be careful of A, being too complex, or B, relying too much on your phone, because anytime you pick up your phone to try to do something, it presents so many other distractions that it might cause more problems than it solves.
Got it. So what would you say has been the biggest sticking point in our relationship that can be attributed to the fact that I don't have ADHD and you do?
It's a tough question because I have usually dated people without ADHD. So, and a lot of times I do see people with ADHD kind of coming together with that, and it's a natural thing. So for me, I don't really have an exact answer for that. But in general, just talking about relationships is knowing that you're going to need variety, you're going to need spontaneity. Like a certain amount of ritual is good, but too much routine is bad. So what are some things you can do to keep it fresh? And this is something that I already know that I need this. So like when we started dating, I was already bringing in like, okay, I know that I'm going to get bored naturally. That's just the way my brain works. And that's one of the reasons that people with ADHD make great entrepreneurs, for example, because, you get bored easily and then you're always looking for the next thing. Obviously, that can be a very negative thing to bring into a relationship if you don't know how to work with it. You don't want to be like, okay, I'm bored of this person, let's find out what's next. Instead, you want to be like, my brain needs some kind of variety, some kind of like some new things that we can bring in. And all you have to do is use your creativity to bring that in yourself instead of expecting the world to bring that in for you.
Well, and in that way, I think that your desire for novelty,
that was the word.
Your inherent, what?
Novelty was the word I was searching for. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Your desire for novelty, your creative mind, that is a relationship superpower, because I see so many relationships in the world, and from my own prior experience, and also what I'm seeing a lot with my clients, is that there isn't this emphasis on creativity, on novelty, and you're hardwired for that. You need that. And if our brains needed that a little bit more, our relationships on a general level would flourish because of that, because relationships can fall stagnant. There's this assumption that you meet somebody, you fall in love, you get together, and then you don't have to go back in and maintain. And typically when women come to me, it's because that check engine light is flashing very loudly saying, hey, there's something going on here. And if they had that intention to keep things fresh and new and novel from the very beginning, that check engine light wouldn't be going off, because that routine maintenance would have been happening all along.
Yeah, it is difficult because we're not really taught to bring creativity, to bring novelty into our relationships. And it's something that everybody needs, because really everything about ADHD is something that neurotypical people deal with as well. Every single thing, it's just you take that knob or that slider and you take it from a 1 or a 2 and you turn it up to a 7 or an 8. So everybody needs novelty. People with ADHD need it a lot more. Like the minute that you don't have that, then things are going to start to get, you're going to be in trouble. But you have the ability to create it even more. So a lot of times the problems that you have with ADHD, you also have the solutions for because of your ADHD brain. And that's because you've developed this creativity over the years without realizing it. Because you get bored easily, your brain knows that it needs to create novelty. So you're bringing that into the relationship, whether you know it or not. And I feel like it's the same thing with even the time blindness. You've probably developed some kind of coping mechanism over the years, but you maybe haven't realized how to harness it yet. We have the hyper focus where if there was something that you really wanted to get done and then you brought all your brain to bear, and then you really try to get this thing done, and you created something. In that process, there was probably some kind of organizational trick or some kind of things you used to get that done, that in times when you're not, firing at 100%, you can go back and realize, what did I learn about myself? Like, what trick did I develop that I can use, outside of those cases?
Hmm. And so as somebody who has ADHD and who requires novelty and who is a creative, and you and I have talked about this before, that creativity is our love language in our relationship. How have you brought that into our relationship? I mean, I can think of plenty of ways that you have creatively expressed love for me, but I don't know how many of those stem from this need for novelty versus how many of them are just, romantic acts. So can you give our listeners some examples of, okay, this is how I've harnessed my need for novelty and my inner creativity as an ADHD person and brought them into my relationship?
Yeah, I think there's two different things there. There's using your creativity for romantic gestures, which is going to satisfy that need to have done something well, to be loved, to be accepted for your own work. And then there's also using your creativity to bring just novelty in how you spend your time together. So for example, for Valentine's Day this year, I had a random idea that I was going to make these little tiny love notes. They're about, 1.5-inch square, and hide them all over your apartment. And I think there's still some you haven't found almost a year later. But that wasn't something that I planned for a long time. It was just this idea that popped out of nowhere. And I think, if you're the person with ADHD, you're going to have all these ideas popping into your brain all the time because, the reason you get distracted is that your brain is literally resetting 5 times more often than a neurotypical brain. The downside is it's really hard to focus with that. The upside is whenever you have that blank, that's where ideas pop in out of nowhere because you don't have the thing you're focusing on that's going to keep that idea away. So anytime you have these ideas that pop in about something to do, have a way to capture that, have a way to write that down so you can remember it later so you don't forget it, because that working memory, remember, isn't 100%. So that's really how you harness that particular superpower. As far as creativity with stuff to do together, that's what the same kind of thing, like, realizing that, I'm a little bit bored with how we're spending, this particular week. Maybe there's something we can do that's out. And then, maybe that could just be a discussion, be like, hey, do you know of anything, like any music things coming up? I've been in the mood for that. Or you just start searching for that on your own. Or, maybe you could take like a night at home and then instead of doing X, we're going to do Y. It doesn't have to be this big, super creative thing. It could just be change, because it's really coming down to change. You could go from, hey, instead of just doing Netflix and chill, we're going to watch an old black and white movie that we heard about that's supposed to be really good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll think of something that comes to mind for me that we've done a few times that you kind of started, was going out for dinner somewhere in Silver Lake. We live in Echo Park, so here in Los Angeles, Silver Lake is the next neighborhood over. And going out to dinner and then walking to a bar for a little nightcapsies. And that's nightcap for those of you who are in this relationship. And you bringing out index cards and instructing me to fill them out a certain way, and you would do the same. And we've done that a few times now. So, and I don't want to play what's in my pocket, but can you remember what some of these prompts were that you would give for us to use on the cards?
Yeah, it was some stuff like things we're grateful for with each other. There was, I think, like sexual things you wanted to try. There was, yeah, those are the only two I'm remembering off the top of my head. But even that wasn't like some grand plan that I've been scheming forever. Like, oh, I'm just thinking about romantic stuff all the time. It's more of just, it just popped into my brain one day and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to note that down for later. Yeah, and it's not this huge thing that takes a whole lot of effort, and you don't have to be wired in or feeling guilty if you don't do some of these things. Like, oh my God, I should be thinking of romantic stuff all the time. Like, no, just like all the little silly ideas that pop in your head, just snag one of them off. And if it seems kind of dumb that are like over the top, you want to do it, like try it out. Might be surprised that the little gestures like that can go a long way. And it's fun. It's fun for both of you.
Well, and that I think is the point, is that, going out for dinner and a drink seems like a pretty standard date, and how just this one little addition to it, the single act of bringing 2 index cards and 2 pens out with you and saying, hey, let's go into the bar for our nightcap and sit separately and fill out these cards, and I'll write down, 3 things I'm looking forward to trying with you sexually in the next 6 months, or 3 things I'm really grateful for in our relationship. And we'll each fill those out. And then when we're both ready, we'll come together, enjoy our cocktail, and share our cards with one another, and allow the other person to read it, to feel loved, and then to take the card home as a memento from the night, but also a reminder of where we want to be going in our relationship, or what we're currently really grateful for in our relationship. And that, I think, is the beauty of the way your brain works, Dan, is that simple act of bringing out the 2 index cards and 2 pens comes very naturally to you. And so I wanted to offer this as a suggestion to other people who are like, okay, yes, I get it. I know I need to do something new in my relationship, but what? Do that.
Yeah,
it's super easy.
It's surprisingly how easy it is to take something that could be considered mundane and to elevate it with just a little bit extra. For example, one of our first dates of going see the Christmas trees in Grand Park and then going for dinner afterwards. And I don't remember exactly where we went after there, but that was all a big walk too. So by making that a surprise, it's like, oh, I'm taking you out. And instead of be like, oh, we're going to do this and then we're going to do dinner. It's like, no, we're going to be dropped off here and then we're going to go on an adventure. And just thinking of it as an adventure is going to change your own mindset, and that it's going to be so apparent that you're thinking of it that way. That's going to make the other person in the relationship more excited too. And I feel like that energy just can kind of exude out. And I think just thinking of it that way makes a really, really big difference.
Yeah, it's mindful. I was talking to someone recently who was like, yeah, my partner, he'll buy me expensive jewelry, and he'll buy me this and he'll buy me that. But, in all the years we've been together, he's never actually written me a love letter. But he has no idea that that's what she really wants, right? He's operating from a place that perhaps her love language is gifts, when in actuality, it can be words of affirmation. It sounds like it's words of affirmation. And what I've seen in our relationship is that with creativity set as the love language, it kind of spans all the different conventional love language categories, because you will surprise me with like little gifts. You will write things for me. You will surprise me in many, many different ways when it comes to touch or quality time together. But it's the thought that went into it that means so much more to me than the monetary component, if that makes sense.
I think there's a lot of men that, in particular, I'm stereotyping here, but that overthink these kind of things, and they don't do the grand gestures because they think they're way grander and they're way more difficult than they are. Like love notes, for example, just get out a pen and start writing, and it's probably going to be dumb. It's not going to be poetry, and that's okay. It really is the thought that counts. And I think they fall back on, just like maybe buying something because they think that's equivalent of that, because like, oh, I can't write a good letter, but so I'm going to do this instead. That shows that's an equivalent thing. Because if I did try to write something, it would come out dumb, and that would be the equivalent of me trying to buy jewelry and it was just worth $1.50 or something. It's like, nah, it's not true at all. And really, any small thing you can do, just try it out. Maybe you heard it from somebody else and you don't want to do it because like, oh, now that I'm copying them. Nobody cares. It's the fact that you did it at all. Everything's been done before. Just creativity in general. I mean, people get so worked up, like as a musician, like, oh, I don't want to copy this. I don't want to sound like that. You're going to sound like somebody before. And I think that's very true for any love language type thing, is just copy, do dumb ideas, do small things, even if it doesn't seem like it's enough, it'll be enough. Just the fact that you're showing the appreciation at all and you're using your brain and you're trying something new.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about RSD, because I think that this plays into how somebody with ADHD needs to feel appreciated in a relationship. So can you spell out what RSD is and kind of explain this notion to our listeners?
Yeah, so RSD is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and it refers to part of the ADHD brain's inability to process emotions from a logical perspective. So I won't go into like the specific neuroscience about it, but what really happens is that if you're upset or feeling rejected in some certain way, you're not going to be able to just turn that emotion down with your logical brain right away. Like, it's going to take a cool down time. And to a certain degree, there's no way around that. But that's difficult, especially, you get to a point where you think you've, quote unquote, mastered ADHD. That's still there because that's literally a physical reaction. So, okay, you know that this is a thing, it's established with both people in their relationship that if you're feeling rejected, you're going to have this intense emotional reaction that's going to last a certain amount of time. So what do you do about that? Part of it is fighting mindfully, so to speak, where if you have a disagreement, do your best to air that out, maybe early in the day when you're both feeling calm, before you let things blow up, kind of be proactive about a small thing before it grows into a big thing. At the same time, don't sweat the small stuff. And I think that goes with having disagreements in relationships in general. Wouldn't you say of A, don't sweat the small stuff, and B, don't ignore the big stuff?
Yeah, yes. And I mean, I think you and I, we have different preferences when it comes to how we resolve conflict. What I'm hearing is that the ADHD brain is prone to being overly sensitive to rejection, more so than the neurotypical brain. So any sort of criticism that I send your way, because you have ADHD, it's going to be amplified a ton compared to somebody who doesn't have that.
Yes, but we have the ability sometimes to overcome that. And it really depends on the timing, because how much is your logical brain in control? Like, how good are you feeling at the moment? And when you have something that could be interpreted as a criticism, how can you phrase that so it doesn't seem like a criticism? It's just that, like, oh, this is the two of us and we want to get better about this. And if you are just like really, really upset about something and it comes out and it's a blow up, because with best intentions, they might still happen, recognize that the person with ADHD isn't going to be able to just process it, snap back right away. It might take until the next day to fully process that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you very much are a proponent of kind of simmer on it before you say something. Wait to determine whether this is a big deal or not. Is this a big enough deal to bring up? Whereas for me, as somebody who, historically speaking, I would hold a lot of stuff in for a long time and then explode. That was my track record for a very long time, and something that I have worked on tremendously and made, I think, big improvements on in this relationship. But it's been, I would say, a real balancing act for us, because I'm improving at saying things in the moment, whereas you tend to ruminate on things and wait a few days to bring them up. And so we butt heads when it comes to that sometimes. So what's the solution there? Say someone's listening, they're like, yep, that's me and that's my partner. Not to say that you and I have mastered this, but what is the way to honor that our brains function differently and that I may need some sort of resolution and closure sooner than you do?
Yeah, I don't think this is the kind of thing that can really be generalized, but look at each individual relationship. And if you've been together for a while, you probably can say, like, okay, in what way have we made each other feel the worst when we're having conflict? And then pinpoint that thing and like, okay, what can we do differently about that? And one thing that has happened in our relationship is the end of the night fight. Because just for me, like my brain is really shutting down. My ability to process things is way lower. And then, if we're blowing up about something like towards the end, like I just don't have the logical capability to process that and then overcome my emotional brain the way I would earlier. So, and that's one small thing that way. That might not apply to everybody because a lot of people with ADHD are very much night people. And I realize that I'm against the curve when it comes to that kind of thing. It's just, what is the one thing that is causing the biggest problem? And then just attack that. And then once you feel like you've improved on that, all right, what's next? And then just kind of go from the bottom of the barrel, the worst things, and then start hitting them one by one. So if you have any specific example, I could do that. I know that wasn't very concrete.
Well, I'll say that I think our use of check-ins has been really helpful.
Yeah. That comes with being proactive.
And check-ins are a mindful time that you come together, and you can pick how frequently you want to do these. You and I typically do them at the beginning of the month. So we're due for our December check-in very soon here. But we sit down, and it's a very safe space to bring up any kind of grievances that have come up over the last month. Something that is so small that in and of itself, you might feel like, this wasn't a big deal. Is it worth bringing up? The check-in is the time and place to do that. So I feel like, now 4+ years into our relationship, that's how we've managed to strike a balance between not shoving things under the rug, but also letting things ruminate, and not reacting, but having a dedicated time and a place where we bring things up. And we're not perfect at it by any means, but I think check-ins are really helpful. It's something I recommend to couples, whether or not you are neurotypical or neurodivergent. And you can have subtopics within your check-ins. Like, all right, let's talk about sex. Let's talk about finances. Let's talk about shared household duties. Let's talk about how we're each feeling about the amount of quality time we've spent together, about what we want to do vacation wise for the rest of the year. So you can use these to create structure and dialogue amongst the topics in your relationship that tend to cause the most conflict, and do them once a month, do them once a week, do them once every 2 weeks. I mean, it's entirely up to you what you want that cadence to look like. But having those check-ins, I think, is really helpful for us. And I've seen it be helpful for other couples too.
One thing that's really important, whether you use check-ins or not, that I think we've been good with, and that's one of the reasons that I think a lot of these things have been able to be easier for us, is just the idea of not keeping score. And that could be difficult for a lot of people that, once you bring something up, the other person's like, well, what about this? And a disagreement or conflict has to be this back and forth where one person's trying to score points with the other, or maybe there's something that you've been kind of simmering on that you weren't sure if you wanted to bring up. And then once they brought something up, and then you're like, oh, well, what about this? And if you're able to leave that behind, this whole who's winning in the relationship, who's caused each other more grievances, what is the current total there? And just think that, like, okay, if there's a conflict, it's me and you versus the problem. Easier said than done, but that's definitely what you want to aim for. Otherwise, even a check-in, which is supposed to be the safest space, can quickly devolve into just blow by blow and back and forth.
Yeah. And I want to touch on that a bit more. This idea of it isn't me versus you, it's me and you versus the problem. And I think the easiest hack in terms of talking about that is, okay, we have this issue, X, whatever this thing is. What are we going to do about it? Not what are you going to do about it, but what are we going to do about this? And another, because I'm all about, handing out tips to people. Another tip I really like that I've used, that you've used, is saying, the story I'm telling myself right now is So I suffer from anxiety. So sometimes my brain will be telling me stories that the logical side of me is like, that cannot be true. And so I will signal to Dan and I'll say, honey, the story I'm telling myself, or the story my brain is telling me right now is, and then I give you some, kind of usually outlandish thing about like, you're not in love with me and you're just doing this, that, and that. And then it's a bid for me to ask you to help me tune into that logical side of my brain. And I know that you've brought it up in situations too, where you're like, my ADHD brain is telling me this. Tell me, am I being rational here or not?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And as far as the ADHD brain saying things, this is where the RSD comes in, where if we don't handle something in a logical way in a check-in or early in sitting down when we're both at 100%, if it is the end of the night and emotions do get high and it becomes into a blow up, that's so easy for me to interpret that as that, like, I have done a bad job as a partner. Like, I am not a good person because, like, how could things get to this point? And then, like, once you get down that hill, everything starts shutting down and you lose the ability to do this kind of like positive logical processing that we're talking about. So it really is preventative, like, because once you get to that point and then you hit the shutdown, you just have to wait for it to be over. And that's not a place that you want to be. And so a lot of dealing with RSD is preventing RSD, because once you're there, you're kind of stuck, at least for a while.
So would it be fair to say that it's typical for folks with ADHD to enjoy a lot of praise, to basically have a praise kink?
Oh, yeah. That's the thing about rejection sensitivity, is that the converse is also true, which I think is one of the reasons that a lot of people with ADHD do go into the creative fields. Like me as a musician, I get to be on a stage and performing and people will applaud for me. That hits exactly the parts of my brain that want to be activated for that.
Yeah. So I am mindful of that, of expressing a lot of gratitude for you and really telling you how proud I am of you often. And not that I'm just paying lip service, but I know that expressing that to you lands differently. It's really important and nourishing for you as somebody who is neurodivergent.
Yeah. And it's also really easy. And this isn't necessarily an ADHD thing, but to be really hard on ourselves. And I think everybody in the world could use more of this, more gratitude. I don't want to say the word praise because it could almost feel condescending in certain ways, but yeah, just giving more positivity out there, because usually the person that's the hardest on us is ourselves, whether that came from something in our past, whether that's just a desire for excellence gone wrong. Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to do anything big at all too, like you're like, oh, I'm never good enough. So to be able to get that from your partner is so, so important. So please, everyone out there, go tell your partners something positive about them today. If you take nothing else from this conversation, just do that.
Yeah, I am grateful for you because ... There's your hack right there. So how does ADHD show up in the bedroom? Let's talk about ADHD and sex.
Yeah, I would say the same kind of thing before, of use this moment for creativity. Your brain is going to get bored more easily than the neurotypical brain. All the same things we talked about with relationships in general apply in the bedroom here. So yeah, getting bored during sex sucks. So instead of saying this is going to happen to me and I'm just going to be sitting there like, use that and use your creativity to keep making things interesting. And I will go into specifics. I'll leave that to you if you want. You're the relationship coach. But yeah, like find ways, like what can I do to change things up? Whether you suggest it ahead of time, whether you're spontaneous with it. Personally, I just love bringing surprises in because that's interesting for everyone involved, but sometimes anticipation can be good too. But yeah, like you always say, sex is play. So why not just bring some more ideas in, try to change things up, make it fun.
Yeah. And whether that be some role play, which doesn't need to be some elaborate thing with costumes and scripts. It can be if that's your thing, but some gentle role play, bring in a new toy, adding some sort of dynamic beforehand. I'll share a story, which I've already shared in an article that I wrote. So I think it's fair game for me to share here that during the pandemic, I went over to Dan's house and he was expecting me. We were going to have a date night at his house during lockdown. And I got there and he was like, "Ma'am, are you here for your massage appointment?" And I was like, "Huh, what?" And I've got, full face of makeup on. I'm wearing red lipstick. And then I was escorted into the massage room and he had like nice massage music playing. Why are you sighing? Continue. But like that kind of element of, and you did give me a very nice massage.
Yes.
You did give me a very nice massage, but that element of, rather than being like, "Hey, do you want a massage?" Right? Like just the extra step. And of course we were doing some giggling and stuff and we were keeping this light and this was fun and this was play. But that extra step of creativity there, like this is now a story that I will forever remember in a way that I won't remember a night where you're just like, "Hey, do you want a massage?" Right? There was this ritual around it that elevated it from just, a what could have been a very normal physical interaction to something special.
Okay, so here's one way that the two of us are very different is that I'm pretty private and don't like to talk about a lot of these things. That's okay. I'm not trying to say, but yeah, obviously I do things like this all the time. I'm always thinking about like, all right, what's one new thing that we can do? Because I know I need variety. I crave it. And instead of waiting for the universe to give it to me, I make it myself. But the cool thing about variety, it doesn't mean that you always need to be doing the next biggest thing or need to be always getting more elaborate or like going down these crazy kinks. That once you've established a variety of things that you've done, just changing it from something you've done before. I mean, having like the simplest quickie and nothing's different and you're just, like done in just minutes. And then you do something elaborate the next night. That's variety in itself. And then you have, traditional loving sex. And then you maybe just have like normal sex, but maybe it's a little bit harder, so to speak. That's variety too. So it doesn't need to be this big crazy thing. Just once you've introduced, say, you have like a palette of different things that you've tried, then it's easy to think of that like, okay, I already have like 50 different ways that I can just transmute the different elements in. And then you enter in like one new element. Oh, now I have 100 and then another. Now you have 200. And if you don't think about it outside of the bedroom, it's easy for it to all kind of like fall into this rut of like always doing the same thing, the same things in the same order. So all you have to do is just like change things around a little bit. And yeah, that's a lot of variety right there.
Yeah. And I mean, I like to say to people that even the most kinky sex can become boring if that's the only thing you're doing all the time.
Exactly.
Right. So what's the one thing that you would want people to know if they are neurotypical, so someone like me, who's in a relationship with somebody who has ADHD? What's the biggest tip you can give folks on how to love people who have ADHD?
I think always two things really, and I'm just going to say because we already talked about it so much, just anything that activates the creative part of the brain is going to be good. Whether we're like encouraging them to do things that are creative, like the little love notes, maybe you do some of it yourself to kick that off. Maybe you do more stuff like playing games instead of always watching TV or movies, something to like, that's going to activate that part of the brain that like really gets them lit up. But other than that, I would say it's a give and take. So say you're frustrated because, maybe they're always late for things. Instead of putting it all on them or all on you, for example, if you think that you have to be bugging them and like setting timers for them, that's point A, or for them to be like, you need to fix this or I'm out the door. That's B. Try to find a happy medium where you're not doing it all for them, but you're also just not putting it all on them. It's like, how can we work together as a team to fix this? And sometimes it might be acceptance too, on that same note, where maybe they wait until right before they leave to pack for a trip. If they manage to do it and still make the plane on time, and that stresses you out because you were packed 3 days ago, just let them do it, because if it works, it works. If you're late for the plane, that's another story. But in general, if they have some kind of like quirks that they do that just drive you crazy, but in the end, it all works out, try to find a way to live with it.
Yeah. And I will say that is true story. I'm the person who packs very far in advance. Dan is the person who packs the morning of, and he never misses the flight.
You know why though?
And
if I tried to pack 3 days before, I wouldn't do it. I would procrastinate. I would get so stressed out. I would start beating myself up. Like, why are you not packing? Like, you have it on your list. It's not doing it. And I'm like, look, I'm going to wait till the last second anyway. Why don't I just shortcut all that stress and self-blame and anxiety and, just do it then anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for having this conversation with me today, Dan.
Thank you. I am grateful for you.
I am so grateful for you. And if somebody is curious about what you do as an ADHD coach, if they have big goals that they're looking to transform into big results, where can people find you?
Yeah, find me at ADHDcoachDan.com. Right now, that's going to my Instagram account, but getting the website up. But yeah, I love working with people that are already successful professionals that have some big creative project that's gathering dust, or maybe they want to change careers, maybe they want to launch a business, but you've already got a pretty good level of executive function, but you're capable of more. Like, there's that one dream that's kind of just burning a hole in your pocket. And that's the kind of people I really love helping.
Wonderful. And if you're looking for more support when it comes to loving your body, having deep intimacy and great sex shame-free, you can find me at renamartine.com or on Instagram at _rena.martine_. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.
I hope that episode was helpful. Hey, listen, if you want to share your singlehood journey, if you've gone somewhere and come back, if you have revelations and wisdom, please share your story. It's going to help other people. Nothing makes us feel more connected than hearing other people's stories. So just send me the audio of your story, and you could just record it directly from your phone and email it to theangrytherapist@gmail.com. Also, if you want our Single on Purpose newsletter, go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life. You will get tools and articles and other people's stories, and also Zoom links to private gathers. So if you want to join our community, go to singleonpurpose.life. Thank you for listening. Be well. We hope you tell a friend.
Hi, John. I'm a very long-time listener and first time interacting, really. But I'll talk about my singlehood journey. I've been single on purpose now for a couple of years, trying to just make sure that I'm the best version of myself before I really enter into another relationship. I think reading your book, just picking it up randomly, I don't remember why, but I really like the title of being purposeful. I purposely single. I had a child quite young, high school girlfriend situation after high school. Anyway, I ended up becoming a single dad when she was a toddler, and mom just didn't want to be around. And I had a series of longer term relationships, but never really experienced the dating culture and the dating pool when I was younger. I had long-term girlfriends, and had a child pretty young, and then became single father, and then that she left, and I was single dad with a little toddler. And I look back now and realize that I didn't have the same value in myself that I do now. I was in my 20s and with a little girl, and thinking, who would want to date a guy, working in construction and 20-something years old, hauling around little baby and traveling and stuff too. My work involved travel too, so I was gone a lot of the weeks. But I realized I never really had an example of what a good relationship looked like. I look back now and see that my mom and dad never had a successful relationship. Maybe before we were born, they were married for a long time. And I hear stories, they would tell me stories about, they packed up and traveled, moved to the West Coast, and that was great. And I'm thankful that they moved out here. But my memory of them from the time that I could even remember is screaming and yelling and divorce and just not nice to each other, not showing love to each other. And it probably made me pretty hard to get attached to anybody. So I know now that looking back that that's a issue that I had. And anyway, yeah, I didn't have a really good example. And I did meet somebody. I got married. We were together for a while. We were together almost 10 years, and I needed to change to not travel. I needed to stop being gone, watching my daughter grow up. I wanted to come home and sleep in my own bed and catch my daughter's last half of her childhood living home, be there for her. And I made a career change when she was about 10. And I know that being home more constantly than out being traveling caused the marriage that I was in to actually have to work versus being home only on the weekends. Being home put me I learned a lot more about what was going on while I wasn't there. But it was just bad. It was not good, and it took a long time to unwind. And so we unwound that marriage, and it was really painful. And my daughter, unfortunately, had a front row seat to the same shit show that I did when I was a kid. And I never meant to put her through that, and I want to have her have a better childhood, and that means dad being okay. So after the marriage, I did find somebody that was fucking wonderful, and she did teach me a lot about what love is. It took a little while. It was completely random. We weren't looking for each other. We happened to both be divorcing our spouses. We were both smack in the middle of a divorce. And so there's a lot of things to figure out there. But the big takeaway I learned in your book was to honor that relationship and to honor the things that were great about it, about like just teaching me so much more about what love is and what it's like to have an equal love where one person isn't set on a pedestal and the other person is below them. And that's what I was used to in a marriage. So we had a big, we both ended up divorcing within 2 weeks of each other, and realizing that it was more of her decision than mine to work on herself, and and she turned me around to work on myself and make sure that I'm there for my daughter for her last few years living together in the house. So I made a point the last 3-4 years ago to make sure that I could figure out how to be the best dad that I could be and not put another woman in front of my daughter. So that I remember going after post-divorce and after breakup, and even before that, I had a lot of anger that I didn't know how to deal with. What my trigger to get help was, I guess, was that sometimes I'd be at work and there was a couple instances where I just broke down and I just started bawling and I didn't know what the hell was going on. I mean, I was sad, I was angry, my marriage was falling apart. I found somebody that I loved. She left. I'm here raising this teenage girl that's also very angry and pissed that she's lost 2 moms now, and I'm the only one here that's in front of her, so she's taking her anger out on me. And it just created a situation where I have to be single. I have to not try to put anybody else in front of her, not try to get into any kind of relationship. Well, I know that I felt like I was pretty fucked up. I felt like I was pretty, my own self-worth wasn't there. But I can say that some of the greatest things in the book were learning, the 4 pillars of your life and working on those and making sure that you're satisfied in all 4 aspects there. It's probably going to be one of my first real significant tattoos that I'll put on my body and cover up some stupid teenage ones. But it's been really, really great process being single. I've now been able to say no to more and more, and I could see a lot more issues that aren't gonna, a lot more incompatibility and a lot more times when, I know that superficial feeling of just a sexual attraction, and that would be great, but also, the shit show that comes afterwards when you have to actually work through some things. And this is the first time in my life that I've purposely been single since being a teenager. I've realized it was in survival mode almost all of my life until now. And now I could be more purposeful and take my time and really get my head right and get myself right, and not be out there looking for somebody because I feel like I'm that stigma that society puts on you for being single is, I go on friends groups and you have all the couples around and you're the single guy. So it's been quite fun. Now I've learned to enjoy it and embrace it. I started traveling randomly one weekend per month when Corona started coming out of Corona, and we could book plane tickets, and I would take my daughter on a lot of trips. And then I went on a lot of trips by myself and started to go on myself. And I just went to Europe for a month on my own, and I happened to ruin my phone halfway through, and it was the best thing ever. I went to no communication, no technology, and traveling through multiple countries and carrying a map and asking strangers for directions. And it's just been really, really good. And I finally feel like my daughter has moved to college and I may be ready to start dating again. I don't know, but I don't want to be out there looking for it, because I find that the greatest love that you're going to run into is going to be completely on accident. It's going to be a collision. It is going to be something that maybe builds, that you sense that spark right away, but maybe it's not the same bonfire that it was attracted to earlier. And maybe it's just a small spark. But anyway, I just wanted to do this little voice note and tell you I'm really, really thankful for the book. It's sitting in front of me now. It's still a regular that I go back to. And I just randomly pick it up sometimes and read a couple of pages in the morning and realize that, there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And I've given it away. I've given it away to a lot of friends that have gone through breakups or different points in their lives. And, I'll actually probably give it, if I start dating anybody, I'll actually probably give it to them and see how they take that. Anyway, thank you. And I just wanted to let you know that your work is great, and I'm really appreciative of it. Thank you.